It was just another ordinary Saturday morning, or so I thought. My daughter was snuggled in her favorite blanket, reading her book on the porch, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The doorbell rang, and when I opened it, I was face to face with her, Karen from the HOA. I barely had a chance to react before she barged in with a look of absolute determination. "Excuse me," she said coldly, "but that blanket, it's a violation of the HOA rules." I stood there stunned. A blanket? Seriously? What was she even talking about? Before I could ask, Karen lunged forward, trying to yank it away from my daughter's grip. My heart raced. What kind of person does that? But what happened next shocked everyone, including Karen herself. This wasn't just about the blanket, it was about something much bigger. Stay tuned, because the twist you're about to hear will leave you speechless. Before we dive into the story, I have a question for you. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city name in the comments below. I love hearing where you're all from. And while you're at it, make sure to hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let me set the stage for you. This story starts off like any other day in our quiet neighborhood. My daughter was happily wrapped up in her favorite blanket, sitting on our front porch, reading a book. The birds were chirping, the sun was shining. It was the kind of peaceful morning you'd expect in a place like this. But then, out of nowhere, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Karen, the woman we all dreaded seeing. She was the head of the HOA, Homeowners Association, and trust me, Karen wasn't your typical neighbor. She was the kind of person who took rule enforcement to a whole new level. I should have known something was off the moment she stepped onto our porch with that look in her eyes. Without any warning, she pointed to my daughter's blanket and started ranting about how it violated the HOA rules. A blanket. I was stunned, but it wasn't just the absurdity of it all. What happened next shocked everyone, including me. You see, this wasn't just about some insignificant blanket. No, Karen had an agenda. One that was darker and more personal than I ever could have imagined. In just a moment, my life was about to change. And trust me, what happens next is going to leave you speechless. It started as any ordinary Saturday morning. The sun was still climbing in the sky, casting a soft golden hue across our neighborhood. The sound of birds chirping echoed in the distance, and a light breeze rustled the leaves on the trees. My daughter, Sophie, was curled up on the front porch, wrapped in her favorite blanket. She was reading one of her beloved books, completely absorbed in the world of fiction. I could hear her giggling quietly to herself, a sound that warmed my heart. Sophie had always been a quiet, introspective child. She loved escaping into stories where the pages became her safe space. At that moment, the world felt calm, peaceful, as though nothing could possibly disrupt the serenity of that morning. But little did I know that tranquility was about to be shattered by a single knock on the door. I was in the kitchen preparing some coffee when I heard the sound of the doorbell. At first, I ignored it, thinking it was probably a delivery or a neighbor stopping by. But then I heard the knock. It was persistent, almost demanding. I froze for a moment, wondering who could be so eager to get my attention at this hour. I walked to the door, already sensing that something felt off. I opened it, and standing on the porch was Karen. Yes, that Karen. You know the type. The one everyone in the neighborhood tries to avoid, the one who always has a complaint, the one who thinks she's the moral compass of the entire community. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I could tell something was different. There was a tense energy in the air that I couldn't quite explain, but I could feel it. She wasn't just here to talk about a lawn that needed trimming or a fence that was slightly out of code. No, this was more serious. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound polite despite the growing unease. "How can I help you?" Karen didn't even return the courtesy of a greeting. Instead, she took a step forward and immediately pointed to Sophie, who was still sitting on the porch, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. "That blanket," Karen said, her voice sharp and cold, "it's a violation of the HOA rules." I stared at her in disbelief. Was she serious? A blanket? What kind of rule could possibly exist about a blanket? Karen seemed to notice my confusion, and without skipping a beat, she continued, You're not allowed to have children using items that are unsanctioned outside. That blanket, it's against the HOA regulations. It needs to be taken inside immediately. I blinked, trying to process what she was saying. A blanket. Outside. A violation of HOA rules? It didn't make any sense. I glanced back at Sophie, still sitting there with her book in hand, completely unaware of the absurd conversation that was unfolding. The blanket in question was nothing special, just a soft, pastel-colored throw that Sophie had inherited from her grandmother. There was no way in the world this blanket could be considered a violation of anything, let alone a violation of some ridiculous homeowners association rule. I'm sorry, what? I finally managed to say, my voice trembling slightly with confusion and disbelief. What on earth are you talking about? Karen didn't seem at all fazed by my confusion. She stepped forward, her eyes narrowing as if she were on some kind of mission to rid the neighborhood of all its violations. It's very clear in the HOA guidelines, she said, her voice laced with authority. Children should not be allowed to have items like that outside. It sets a bad example. It's unsightly, and it could potentially violate the community's image. I was speechless. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A blanket was now a threat to the neighborhood's image? Who had made up these rules? Who was Karen to decide what was unsightly or not? This wasn't a public park. This was my home, my porch, my daughter's safe space. Karen, I don't know where you're getting this from, I said, trying to maintain my composure, but this is ridiculous. There's nothing wrong with my daughter's blanket. She's a child. She's just reading on our porch. But Karen wasn't having it. The smug look on her face only deepened, and she took another step forward. I don't think you understand, she said, raising her voice ever so slightly. The HOA has rules for a reason, and I'm here to enforce them. This kind of behavior can't be tolerated, and it's only a matter of time before others start questioning your decision to allow it. I could feel the anger building inside of me. What right did this woman have to dictate how I raised my child or what my family could do in our own yard? Who did she think she was? Karen, I'm going to have to ask you to leave, I said firmly, stepping in front of her. This is nonsense. You can't just come into my house and tell me what to do with my daughter's blanket. But Karen wasn't backing down. Her eyes locked onto me with a cold, unyielding gaze, and she reached for the blanket. My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't believe it. She was trying to grab it, right out of my daughter's hands. I felt my stomach churn with a mixture of shock and fury. No, I shouted, stepping in front of Sophie, my arms protecting her. What do you think you're doing? Karen didn't seem to care about my protest. She reached out again, and this time, she got close enough to touch the blanket. It's not just about the blanket, she sneered. It's about making sure this community is following the rules. I'm doing my duty. But Sophie, finally understanding what was happening, stood up and clutched the blanket tighter to her chest. She looked at me, eyes wide with fear, clearly confused as to why this woman was trying to take something that was hers. What had she done wrong? And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about a blanket. This was about control. Karen wasn't trying to enforce any real rule. She was trying to exert power over my family, and she had picked the most ridiculous, trivial thing to do it. It was no longer about whether the blanket belonged on the porch. It was about her desire to assert authority in any way she could. As I stood there, blocking Karen's advances, I could feel the tension in the air grow thicker. Something was about to snap, something I wasn't prepared for. But what came next would be far more shocking than anything I could have anticipated. To truly understand what happened that Saturday morning, you need to know a little more about the woman who stood in front of me, Karen, the self-appointed enforcer of the HOA rules. Karen wasn't like the other neighbors. She wasn't just the kind of person who liked to keep to herself. No, she was different. She had a reputation, and not the kind anyone would want. Karen had lived in our neighborhood for over a decade, and in all that time, she had made herself known for all the wrong reasons. The minute she moved in, it was clear that she had one thing in mind, taking control. She wasted no time in aligning herself with the homeowners association. slowly working her way up the ranks until she became its unofficial leader. Some people like to say she ran the show, and for a while it seemed that way. The HOA, or Homeowners Association, was originally meant to help maintain the community's standards, keeping our streets clean, ensuring homes were properly maintained, and keeping a general sense of order. But over time, under Karen's influence, it had become a tool for control. If Karen didn't like something, it became a rule. If Karen didn't approve of someone, she made their lives difficult. The neighborhood that once felt like a friendly, tight-knit community had slowly turned into a place where people walked on eggshells, terrified of making a mistake that would bring Karen's wrath down upon them. I remember the first time I crossed paths with Karen. It was during one of the infamous HOA meetings. At the time, I didn't understand the politics of the neighborhood or why everyone seemed so tense, but it didn't take long to figure out. As soon as the meeting began, Karen was the first to speak, her voice loud and commanding. It was as if the room fell silent just by her presence. Rules are rules, she'd say, no matter what the issue was. We can't have exceptions. If we start making exceptions, the whole community will fall apart. It didn't matter whether it was something as small as the color of a fence or as big as a neighbor's barking dog. Karen was always ready to pounce. She was relentless, and over time, she managed to create an environment where everyone was too afraid to speak up. If you dared to challenge her, she'd find a way to get you, whether it was by issuing fines or bringing up your violations at every meeting. It felt like an endless cycle of intimidation. I'll never forget the time Karen went after the Smith family. They had a beautifully landscaped garden, but one year the HOA rulebook got an update and their rose bushes were suddenly deemed too tall and in violation. Karen made it her personal mission to make sure they trimmed their bushes back to her exact specifications. When the Smiths tried to explain that they were following all other rules and the garden had been that way for years, Karen refused to listen. She went so far as to knock on their door multiple times, demanding that they cut down the roses, otherwise she'd take them to court. It was moments like these that made it clear just how far Karen was willing to go. The Smiths had always been kind, quiet neighbors, but Karen's demands became too much for them. They moved out within 6 months, leaving the neighborhood feeling a little emptier and a lot more tense. But Karen's reign didn't stop there. She was always looking for new opportunities to assert her dominance, and my family, unfortunately, became her next target. At first, I didn't realize why Karen seemed to have taken such a personal interest in us. We were just a regular family. I worked from home, my husband was a software engineer, and Sophie, our 10-year-old daughter, was a quiet, thoughtful child. We didn't rock the boat. We didn't throw loud parties or break any rules. Yet, somehow, Karen started taking note of our every move. The first incident came when I put up a small flag on the porch for the 4th of July. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a simple red, white, and blue flag hanging on a pole. I didn't think much of it, considering the entire neighborhood would usually have some kind of patriotic decoration up around that time. But 2 days after I hung the flag, Karen knocked on our door. "That flag is too big," she said, standing there with her arms crossed, glaring at me. "It violates the HOA standards. It's not allowed to be displayed like that." I was dumbfounded. Too big? It was a standard-sized flag, no different than the one hanging in most of our neighbors' yards. But Karen, in her usual fashion, refused to back down. After some back and forth, I was forced to take the flag down. That was the first real taste I had of Karen's ability to make life difficult for the people around her. It didn't stop there. Next, it was the driveway. We had parked our family van a little too far from the curb one afternoon, and Karen came marching over with a tape measure, ready to issue a fine. She claimed that the position of the van was blocking pedestrian traffic, a complete fabrication, since our driveway was wide enough for 2 cars to park side by side without blocking anyone's path. It became a pattern. Every time I turned around, Karen was there, scrutinizing the tiniest of details. The house number was too small. The tree in the front yard was slightly tilted. The fence needed repainting, even though it had just been done last summer. It was as if Karen had made it her mission to find something, anything, to criticize. I tried to ignore it at first, I kept my head down, followed the rules, and went on with my life. But as time went on, I realized this wasn't just about enforcing rules, it was about control. Karen wanted to dictate how we lived, and she didn't care what it took to get her way. And that's where the blanket came in. I don't know exactly when it started, but Karen began watching our house more closely. She would drive by several times a day, often slowing down to peer into the yard. Sophie would be outside playing, and Karen would be watching from her car, like some sort of self-appointed neighborhood security officer. I thought it was strange at first, but then I started to notice it more. Whenever I was in the front yard, doing something as simple as watering the plants, Karen would appear. Standing across the street, her eyes trained on our every move. It wasn't just that she was a watchful neighbor. It was that she was always looking for something to point out, something to criticize. And then one day it was the blanket. Sophie was outside, sitting on the porch and reading her book. The blanket had been a gift from my mother, something Sophie had treasured for years. It wasn't just any blanket, it was a symbol of comfort and safety, a piece of home. But to Karen, it was an unsanctioned item in the front yard. To her, it was just another excuse to poke her nose into our lives and create a problem where none existed. That was when the tension really started to build between us. Karen was no longer just enforcing rules, she was trying to take control of our lives. And this time it was personal. She wasn't just targeting a minor infraction. She was going after something that was sacred to us. Karen had crossed a line, but what happened next would completely change the way the entire neighborhood saw her. It all came to a head on that fateful Saturday morning. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and my daughter Sophie was sitting on our front porch, wrapped in her blanket, blissfully reading her book. I was in the kitchen making coffee, still basking in the warmth of a peaceful morning. Life felt simple, ordinary. Little did I know, things were about to take a very unexpected turn. I heard the doorbell ring, followed by an abrupt knock. At first, I thought it was just another package or maybe a neighbor stopping by for a casual chat. But when I heard the knock again, this one louder and more insistent, I felt a strange sense of unease. I walked over to the door, my mind racing through possible scenarios. As I opened it, I was greeted by none other than Karen. "Hello," she said, her voice as sharp as ever. "We need to talk." My heart sank. I knew exactly what this was about. It wasn't the first time Karen had showed up at our doorstep uninvited, but this time, something about her demeanor was different. She wasn't here to discuss the color of the fence or some other minor issue. No, she was here for something else. Something that felt wrong. I didn't even get a chance to say anything before Karen continued. "Your daughter's blanket," she paused, staring at Sophie, still sitting on the porch, oblivious to the tension building around her. "That blanket is a violation of the HOA's guidelines. It needs to be removed immediately." A wave of disbelief hit me. A blanket? Of all things to target. Karen had decided that a simple, innocent blanket was a breach of HOA rules. I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of sanity, but all I saw was cold determination. I glanced over at Sophie. She was still engrossed in her book, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. My chest tightened. How could Karen pick on something so trivial? "Karen," I began, trying to keep my voice calm. "This is ridiculous. What are you even talking about? It's just a blanket." But Karen didn't back down. Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms as if she were preparing for battle. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. This is not just a blanket. It's a violation of the HOA's guidelines. Children shouldn't be allowed to use such unsanctioned items outside. The HOA is very clear on these rules, and I'm here to enforce them. This community needs to maintain its standards." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Unsanctioned items? Was she serious? I looked at Sophie again, who was still completely oblivious to the drama unfolding around her. How did this escalate to something so bizarre? Before I could respond, Karen took a step forward, her hand reaching out toward the blanket as if to grab it from Sophie's lap. My breath caught in my throat. This was happening. She was actually trying to take my daughter's blanket. No, I shouted, rushing forward to intercept her. What do you think you're doing? Karen froze for a moment, and for the first time, a flicker of hesitation passed through her eyes. But then, she simply shook her head, as if to dismiss my objection. You don't understand, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. The HOA has rules, and they apply to everyone. No one is exempt, not even you. My mind was racing. This was insane. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules, she was trying to control every aspect of our lives. My daughter, a child, was now the target of her obsessive need for power. But I wasn't going to stand by and let her take what didn't belong to her. Karen, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief, this is my daughter's blanket. You can't just come in here and take it. It's not breaking any rules. It's just a blanket. Why are you doing this? Karen's gaze hardened. She stepped closer, her fingers still hovering over the blanket. I'm doing this because I have to. You may think it's just a blanket, but this is about more than that. If we let these little things slide, what's next? People will start doing whatever they want, and this neighborhood will fall apart. I'm not letting that happen. It felt like my head was spinning. This wasn't about a blanket. This was about Karen trying to assert her control, to impose her will on our lives in the most ridiculous way possible. At that moment, I stood my ground. I'm not going to let you take it, I said firmly, blocking her path. You have no right to do this. Karen's expression twisted with annoyance, and for a moment, I thought she might push me aside and snatch the blanket anyway. But she stopped, her eyes flicking over to Sophie. Sophie had finally noticed what was happening. She stood up slowly, clutching her blanket tightly to her chest, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. She didn't fully understand what was going on, but she could feel the tension in the air. Mom? Sophie asked softly, her voice trembling. What's going on? I turned to her, doing my best to keep my own fear and anger in check. It's okay, sweetheart, I said, my voice steady but firm. Everything's fine. Just stay here with me. Karen, meanwhile, had been watching this exchange with a smirk. You see, she said, as if she were explaining something to a child, this is the problem. If we don't keep things in check, things get out of hand. You don't even realize it, but you're teaching your daughter that she doesn't have to follow the rules. I felt a surge of rage. This woman was insane. She was standing there, lecturing me about teaching my daughter how to follow rules, when she was the one trying to impose ridiculous, made-up regulations. Before I could respond, I heard a voice from across the street. Hey, Karen, what are you doing over there? I turned in surprise to see Steve, one of our other neighbors, walking toward us. He was a quiet, reserved guy, the kind of person who kept to himself, but always had a kind word when you needed it. He was watching the scene unfold from his porch, and something about his calm demeanor told me he wasn't going to let Karen get away with this. Karen looked over at him, clearly annoyed. I'm dealing with a violation. It's none of your business, Steve. But Steve wasn't backing down. He walked up to us, his eyes never leaving Karen. Actually, it is my business. You've been doing this for years, Karen. You can't keep bullying everyone in this neighborhood. I was taken aback. Steve wasn't the type to get involved in conflict, and yet here he was standing up for me. It was like a switch had been flipped in the neighborhood. Suddenly, people were starting to take notice. You don't get to push people around anymore, Steve continued. You've harassed enough people for far too long. It's time someone put an end to it. The tension was palpable. Karen, caught off guard, took a step back. What are you talking about? She snapped, her composure cracking for the first time. This is just about following the rules. But Steve wasn't done. No, it's not, he said. This is about you trying to control everyone's lives. You don't get to do that anymore. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Karen's eyes flicked between me, Steve, and Sophie, clearly realizing she was no longer in control of the situation. I couldn't believe it. The moment I had been waiting for, someone standing up to Karen, was finally happening. But little did I know, this confrontation was only the beginning of something far bigger. Something that would shake our entire neighborhood to its core. The moment Steve intervened, I could see that something inside Karen had snapped. Her once confident, composed demeanor began to crack, revealing a glimpse of the vulnerability underneath. For the first time, it seemed like she realized she wasn't invincible, that maybe, just maybe, there was more to this than enforcing arbitrary rules. As she stepped back, her eyes darted between Steve, Sophie, and me, her fists clenched at her sides. She looked furious and desperate. It was like she was grasping for control, but the more she tried to assert it, the more she realized it was slipping away. The entire neighborhood had been witnessing this bizarre scene unfold, and it was clear that something had changed. People were no longer afraid of Karen, but there was something that none of us had realized until that moment. Something that would explain Karen's obsessive need to control everything in sight. You see, Karen wasn't just some random rule enforcer. She wasn't just the local HOA leader trying to assert dominance. There was something much deeper going on beneath the surface, something that, until now, had been hidden. As Karen glared at Steve, I saw her lips tighten into a thin line. Her posture was defensive, as if she were bracing for an attack. What was going on with her? What had driven her to become so fixated on controlling every aspect of the neighborhood? Why was she so desperate to have authority over something as trivial as a blanket? It wasn't until a few moments later that I understood. Steve, you don't get it, Karen spat, her voice shaking. This isn't about rules anymore. It's about control. I blinked. Control? What did she mean by that? She had always acted like it was about rules, about maintaining some semblance of order. But now, she was admitting that it was something far more personal than just enforcing a neighborhood code. Steve stood his ground, his voice steady. Then what is it about, Karen? Why don't you just leave us all alone? Why do you care so much about something so insignificant? Karen's eyes narrowed, her jaw clenched, and for the first time, I saw the flicker of real emotion, anger in her eyes. You think this is just about the blanket? This is just one small piece of a bigger picture, she said, her voice dropping into a low, almost dangerous tone. You have no idea what I've been through. You all think I'm just some uptight, controlling neighbor, but it's not that simple. This is about power. This is about taking back what's mine. I could feel the tension thickening in the air. What was she talking about? What had happened to her to make her act like this? What power was she talking about? I glanced over at Steve, and I could tell he was equally confused. He exchanged a quick, uncertain glance with me, but neither of us said anything. We were both waiting for Karen to explain herself, to clarify what she meant by power. And then, almost as if she couldn't hold it in any longer, Karen spoke again. You think the HOA is just about managing complaints and enforcing rules? It's not. It's about control. I've been fighting for control over this neighborhood for years. You don't understand what it's like to feel powerless, constantly being overlooked, dismissed. I've spent so long trying to prove I matter, trying to make people take me seriously, but no one ever did. So I had to take matters into my own hands. My mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of her words. Powerless? Was this all some kind of twisted compensation for something in her past? Karen paused, her eyes flicking over to Sophie, who was still holding onto her blanket tightly. It's not about you, Sophie, she added almost to herself, her voice a strange mixture of frustration and defeat. It's about everyone else. Everyone who always ignored me, dismissed me, thought I was just another boring neighbor with no voice. But I'm done being invisible. I'm done letting people walk all over me. The HOA gives me power. I can make people follow the rules, make them comply. I'm not just the leader. I'm the one who decides what's right and wrong. It hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't about a blanket. This wasn't even about enforcing HOA guidelines. This was about Karen's deeper need to control, to prove her worth, to make herself feel seen and heard in a world that in her mind had ignored her for far too long. Her obsession with the rules, her constant surveillance of the neighborhood, and her relentless need to make others follow her directives, all of it came from a place of deep insecurity and desperation. Karen was not just enforcing rules because she thought they were important. She was doing it because, in her eyes, enforcing the rules was the only way she could maintain a semblance of power in a world where she had always felt small, insignificant, and overlooked. I could feel a chill run down my spine. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, almost. But then, the reality hit me. Karen was dangerous. She wasn't just trying to control a small group of people, she was willing to destroy the peace of the entire neighborhood, all in the name of her own validation. And that was something I couldn't allow. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. "Karen," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief, "you're so obsessed with control that you've forgotten what really matters. This neighborhood isn't about rules for the sake of rules. It's about people, about families living here together. You're tearing everyone apart with your constant need to enforce arbitrary guidelines. You're pushing us all to the brink." Karen's eyes flashed with rage. "I'm not tearing anyone apart. I'm making this place better," she snapped, her voice rising in volume. "You think this neighborhood would be better off without me? Without the rules? You're all living in denial. The chaos is coming, and I'm the only one who can stop it." Steve took a step forward, his expression hardening. "No, Karen. You're the one creating the chaos. You've been doing it for years, and we're all tired of it." For the first time, Karen seemed to waver. Her lips trembled slightly, and I could see the cracks in her facade, the cracks in the control she had so carefully built up around herself. But instead of backing down, Karen's desperation only grew. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling with the weight of everything she had just revealed. "You don't understand," she muttered, almost to herself. "I have to do this. I have to hold on to this power. If I let it go, I'll just be another invisible woman." But it was too late. The neighborhood had already started to change. People were no longer afraid of Karen. They were no longer intimidated by her threats and power plays. And what had started as a quiet rebellion in the hearts of a few neighbors was now becoming a movement, one that could no longer be stopped. In that moment, I realized something crucial. The power didn't belong to Karen anymore. It belonged to the community, the neighborhood that was coming together, rejecting her toxic influence and standing up for what was right. And that's when the real battle began. The tension in the air was palpable. For a long moment, Karen stood there, her chest heaving, staring at us with eyes full of fire and fury. Her face twisted with frustration as she tried to regain control of the situation. But the more she fought to hold onto her power, the more she realized that it was slipping away, slipping from her grasp like sand through her fingers. Her eyes darted to Sophie, who still held her blanket tightly against her chest, clearly confused by what was happening. Sophie looked from Karen to me, then back to Karen again, her innocence radiating from her every movement. She didn't understand the depth of the conflict unfolding in front of her, but she could feel the intensity of it. Karen's gaze softened for just a moment as she looked at Sophie. But then just as quickly the harsh, cold expression returned. "You don't get it, do you?" Karen spat. "This isn't about you or your blanket. It's about control. It's about doing what's right for this neighborhood." Her voice wavered for a split second, but the anger in her tone was still unmistakable. But just as Karen prepared to take another step forward, something happened. Something none of us could have anticipated. A voice rang out from the other side of the street, cutting through the tension. "What's going on here?" I turned toward the sound of the voice, and to my surprise, I saw several neighbors standing at the edge of their yards. People I had never really spoken to before, but who now looked concerned, as if they had been watching the entire confrontation unfold from behind their windows or porches. Steve, too, turned toward the gathering crowd. There were at least 5 or 6 people now watching, their arms crossed, their expressions curious but apprehensive. Among them was Mr. Reynolds, the quiet retiree who had lived down the block for as long as I could remember. He was known for his gentle demeanor and reserved nature, and yet there he was, standing at the front of the crowd, his arms crossed and his eyes locked on Karen. "Karen," he said, his voice steady but firm, "what's this about? Why are you causing trouble over a blanket?" I watched as Karen's face reddened, her body stiffening with indignation. It was clear she hadn't expected her little show of authority to be questioned so publicly. But the moment the crowd started gathering, it was like a light bulb went off in everyone's heads. This wasn't just about a blanket anymore. It was about standing up to Karen and her oppressive rule over the neighborhood. Karen glared at Mr. Reynolds, her eyes filled with fury. "You don't understand, Reynolds," she snapped. "This neighborhood is falling apart because no one follows the rules. No one respects authority. I'm just trying to maintain order." But Mr. Reynolds wasn't intimidated. "We all know you've been enforcing rules left and right for years, Karen. But you've gone too far this time. Picking on a child and her blanket? That's not protecting the community, that's bullying. And we're all tired of it." The crowd murmured in agreement. It was a ripple, at first, a quiet acknowledgement of what had been building for a long time. But the more people spoke up, the more Karen realized that the grip she had over the neighborhood was slipping. The realization hit her like a freight train. Her power was gone. A neighbor named Jessica, a young woman with 2 small children of her own, stepped forward next. "You've been making life miserable for everyone for too long, Karen. People are scared to even speak up because of you. But we've had enough. You can't control us anymore. We're not afraid of you." I watched as Karen's face twisted with disbelief. The anger on her face was growing, but underneath it there was something else, fear. The fear of losing her control, of being exposed as the manipulative, power-hungry person she truly was. Her reign of terror was over, and the reality was sinking in. Steve, standing beside me, gave a subtle nod. He had been right all along. This wasn't just about a blanket. It was about years of Karen's dominance over the neighborhood, years of her bullying and controlling everyone she came into contact with. And, finally, the residents had had enough. But then, as the crowd continued to grow and the momentum started to shift in our favor, Karen did something unexpected. She took a step back, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to regain her composure. Her voice dropped, almost as if she were speaking to herself rather than the growing crowd. "You don't understand," she murmured, her words filled with desperation. "I had to do this. I had to take control. The HOA, the rules, they were the only way I could feel like I mattered. I spent so many years being invisible, dismissed, laughed at. This was the only thing I could do to make people listen to me, to make people see me." There it was, the underlying truth that had been hidden beneath all the venomous control and manipulation. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry tyrant. She was someone who had been battling her own feelings of inadequacy, someone who had felt small, overlooked, and ignored for far too long. The HOA rules, the constant policing of the neighborhood, it wasn't about maintaining order, it was about validation. Karen had used her position of power to fill a void in her life that had been there for years. But now, that validation was slipping away, and Karen couldn't handle it. I saw her shoulders slump slightly as the reality of the situation finally dawned on her. The neighbors were no longer afraid. They weren't going to let her control them anymore. The community had finally found its voice, and it was louder than Karen's influence had ever been. "This isn't over," Karen spat, her voice still holding a trace of defiance. "You may think you've won, but you haven't. I will not be ignored." But the crowd wasn't intimidated anymore. They had seen the real Karen, the scared, insecure woman who had used power to mask her own pain. And no matter how much she tried to hold on to her grip, it was clear Karen's time had come to an end. As the crowd began to disperse, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of Karen. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was no longer her playground. Sophie, still holding her blanket, looked up at me with wide eyes. "Mom, what happened? Why was she so mad?" I smiled softly and pulled her into a hug. "It's over, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay." And just like that, the neighborhood had changed. No longer under Karen's oppressive thumb, the residents of the community were free to live their lives without fear, to be themselves without looking over their shoulders. The day that had started with such tension had ended with a powerful shift, a shift that no one would soon forget. Karen's reign of terror had come to an end, and we were finally free. The air in the neighborhood was thick with tension in the days following the showdown with Karen. As much as it seemed like the moment had been a turning point, the aftermath of that confrontation was far from simple. The sense of relief that had swept through the community was quickly replaced by the inevitable consequences of finally standing up to someone who had controlled everything for so long. Karen, despite her outward bravado, wasn't the type to give up easily. She had made her power and influence her entire identity, and to lose it, especially in front of so many people, had cut deeper than I think anyone could have imagined. But as much as she tried to fight it, her control over the neighborhood had officially unraveled. The seeds of rebellion had already been planted, and there was no going back. In the first few days after that fateful encounter, it was like the whole neighborhood had breathed a collective sigh of relief. People were finally talking openly, sharing their experiences with Karen's overreach, their frustrations with her constant surveillance, and the feeling of walking on eggshells every time she came around. Some neighbors who had been too intimidated to speak out before were suddenly feeling empowered. The idea of reclaiming the neighborhood as a place of peace, where everyone could live without fear of constant judgment, was exhilarating. But as much as the neighborhood felt lighter, there was no denying that the fallout from Karen's exposure wasn't going to be smooth. For weeks, rumors swirled around, and despite the fact that most people were relieved she was no longer in control, the fear of retribution lingered. The HOA, now essentially a powerless entity without Karen's iron grip, became a topic of conversation at every neighborhood meeting. Who would take over? Who would ensure the rules were still enforced? The truth was, many people were wary of the HOA, even without Karen at the helm. It had become a symbol of control, a reminder of how easily someone could use an organization meant for good to impose their own will on others. But the void left behind by Karen's departure was undeniable. Without her, there was no clear leader, and the community was left grappling with how to rebuild. Would we go back to the way things were, or would we be able to forge a new path, one that was grounded in mutual respect and understanding? For me, it was a time of reflection. The events of the past few weeks had been exhausting. At first, I had been so caught up in the conflict with Karen that I hadn't fully realized the toll it was taking on me and my family. Sophie had been affected, too. As much as she seemed to understand that Karen was no longer in control, there were still moments when I could see the lingering confusion and fear in her eyes. Why had Karen tried to take her blanket? Why had she been so angry? The community was healing, but it wasn't without its scars. People were still adjusting to the idea that they could stand up for themselves, that they didn't have to be afraid anymore. The challenge, however, was finding a way to make sure Karen's shadow didn't loom over us for much longer. Then, something happened that completely shifted the dynamic and provided the ultimate twist to this entire saga. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished helping Sophie with her homework and was sitting down with a cup of tea when the doorbell rang. I was expecting a delivery, but when I opened the door, I was met with an unexpected sight. Standing before me was Karen. Her appearance was almost unrecognizable. Gone was the rigid, unapproachable figure of the woman who had been the neighborhood's self-appointed enforcer. Instead, she looked vulnerable. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes hollow with exhaustion, and she looked, for the first time, like someone who had been utterly defeated. She wasn't wearing the confident, calculating mask she had worn for so long. This time, she seemed almost lost. "I need to talk to you," she said, her voice weak, almost hesitant. I didn't know what to think. The woman who had tried to take my daughter's blanket, who had manipulated and controlled the entire neighborhood for years, was standing on my doorstep, looking like she was about to crumble under the weight of her own actions. "What is it, Karen?" I asked, my voice cautious. I didn't know what to expect from this woman, but I knew better than to trust her completely. She looked over her shoulder nervously, as if checking to see if anyone was watching, and then stepped inside without waiting for me to invite her in. I instinctively closed the door behind her, keeping my distance. "I don't have anywhere else to go," she began, her voice trembling. I've made so many mistakes, and I don't know how to fix things. It was as if she was speaking more to herself than to me. The woman who had once held the neighborhood in the palm of her hand was now standing there, broken, vulnerable, and human. She wasn't a villain anymore. She was a woman who had been running on empty for too long, driven by a need for validation that had consumed her. I've spent years trying to control everything, she continued, her voice breaking. I thought if I could just make everyone follow the rules, then maybe I would finally feel like I mattered. But I was wrong. I lost sight of everything that really matters, and now, I have nothing. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to slam the door in her face, to tell her she had made her bed and now had to lie in it. But there was something in her eyes, something raw and painful, that made me pause. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the same Karen I had faced weeks ago. Karen, I don't know what to say, I said slowly, my voice softening despite myself. You've hurt a lot of people. You've caused a lot of pain. But the truth is, I don't think anyone ever wanted to make you feel like you didn't matter. Her eyes flickered with something close to regret. I didn't know how else to cope. I thought if I just kept pushing people, kept making them obey, then I would be in control of something, anything. But now I've lost everything. It was a sad, humbling moment. The woman who had once ruled our neighborhood with an iron fist was now a shadow of the person she used to be. She wasn't asking for forgiveness, at least not yet, but she was asking for understanding, something that was hard to offer after everything she had done. Karen, I said, sighing, what do you want from us? From me? She hesitated, clearly struggling with what to say. I don't know. I guess I just want to make things right. I don't want to be that person anymore. And for the first time, I saw the Karen I had never expected to see, not the angry, manipulative enforcer, but the human being behind the mask. She was broken, yes, but she was also acknowledging the harm she had done. I could see it now. This wasn't about a blanket or the HOA rules. This was about a woman who had used control to mask her own insecurities, her own fears of being invisible. But now that she had lost it all, she was finally facing the consequences of her actions. The conversation that followed wasn't easy, but for the first time, it felt like Karen was trying to make amends. Whether or not she succeeded was yet to be seen, but one thing was clear. The world was no longer the same, and neither was she. And as for the neighborhood, we had weathered the storm. The fight had been long, but we had won not just for ourselves, but for the future of the community. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all. The battle with Karen had ended, but a new chapter had just begun. Now that you've heard the story, I want to know, what do you think? Have you ever had a neighbor like Karen? Or have you ever felt the need to stand up for what's right, even when it seemed impossible? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories, and remember, your voice matters. And if you want to see more stories like this, stories of empowerment, change, and real-life drama, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. I've got so much more to share with you, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Also, if you think this story could help someone who might be facing a similar situation, share it with your friends. Let's continue to inspire each other, stand up for what's right, and support one another in creating communities where we can all thrive. Thank you for being a part of this journey. Stay tuned, and I'll see you in the next video.